Welcome to Biblical Viewpoints, a program brought to you by the Churches of Christ and dedicated to the restoration of New Testament Christianity. For over 30 years, it has been the intent of this program to uphold the Bible as the final authority in religious matters. You have heard man's viewpoints, but we invite you to open God's Word and join us as we search for the biblical viewpoint.
The greatest thing in this world, Robbie, is to be able to follow Jesus. We sing the songs, I will follow him. Wherever he goes, we sing songs like I want to follow him. And yet, many times, those are just words in a book. And we utter those words, but by our actions, we say, well, I don't want to follow Jesus. I do, as long as it don't cost me anything. If I don't have to give up a football game at UT, or if I don't have to do this, this, and this, then, yeah, I'll follow Jesus. But if a football game or some sporting activity or something that I want to involve myself in, then I don't want to do that. A good friend of mine, remember the church at C Street now, was then too, but early on loved to play golf. And a lot of those golf tournaments were on Sunday. Well, Sunday morning, you didn't see him in the worship assembly. And he later realized, there's things in this life more important than golf. And if the tournament goes on Sunday and I can't attend services, I won't play in the tournaments. And he quit. And you got to admire, and that's a light thing really compared to what we've talked about in our last program of men and women who were put out of the synagogue, who were killed, that were looked out, searched out, and found and destroyed. When you think about those kinds of things, giving up a golf game or a football game or something like that is insignificant, but show you how little we think sometimes about it. And it's so hard. Churches have quit having gospel meetings because no one attends. They've stopped having, some of them, vacation Bible school. Nobody attends. They've stopped having a lot of activities they used to have because no one attends. Our own brethren don't attend. Well, we don't want to pay the price, do we? And that's a small price compared to what some have had to pay.
Yeah, there's a very well-known theologian of the past century who wrote a book in which he talks about what he called cheap grace. And he believed, now to be fair with him, he believed in the most of the tenets of Calvinism. He did believe that once a person was saved, they could never be lost again, and that salvation was by grace only, and that nothing could be done in order to gain one's salvation. Mm-hmm. There was nothing that one could do. He was elected by God. But he said one of the things that he was afraid of is that when in teaching that, which he believed to be the truth, he said we have cheapened grace, and we don't realize how valuable something like that really is. And the trouble is that when that false doctrine is taught, that's exactly what the consequence is. It is. People that come to think of it as, well, I can't do anything to gain it, I can't do anything to lose it, and therefore I don't really have to give up anything in order to follow Jesus. Right. It's all been accomplished on the cross of Calvary, and there's nothing that I can do to change that. And so if I want to play golf on Sunday instead of meeting with the saints as I'm commanded in the Scriptures, what difference does it make? I'm saved one way or the other. That's the consequence of that sort of teaching. Right. That is foreign to the Word of God. Jesus doesn't teach anything like that. Jesus tells us that if you want to come after me, you've got to deny yourself, you've got to take up your cross, and daily you've got to follow along behind me. You've got to suffer hardships, you've got to pay high tolls, and it's going to be difficult much of the way that you travel if you're following along behind me. And it's so very foreign to so much of what we hear today that's labeled as Christianity.
Right. And and you don't ever hear Jesus saying, like you was talking about there's nothing you do to get it, there's nothing you do to lose it, so don't worry about life, everything's fine. But we hear him saying, as you just pointed out, just the opposite.
That's right. And so we've talked about up to this point in the lesson how that Jesus didn't disguise anything. Jesus showed exactly what it was going to cost in order to be a disciple of his. When there were people that were eager to line up behind him and to follow him, he turned around and he explained to them, look, there may be times when you don't have anywhere to sleep at night. There might be people that you have loved your entire life that will turn on you and have nothing to do with you. As a matter of fact, would deliver you up to be put to death. Now, are you willing to suffer all of those things in order to follow me? In that case, then come along. But you need to understand up front what the consequences are going to be. But now Jesus was also very upfront about the benefits, the rewards. Now, we would say, oh, that's great. That's what we want to talk about. That's what we want to hear about. We want to hear about the rewards, the benefits of being a disciple. Well, very well. We come to Matthew chapter 20, and Jesus tells this parable about the owner of a vineyard who goes out and he begins to acquire workers to come. And this is just after his encounter with the rich young ruler, and there's a reason that it fits into that context. The rich young ruler, you remember, walked away sorrowful. He wouldn't give up his great riches to come and to follow Jesus. So now Jesus is going to talk about the rewards. The disciples say, look, we've forsaken everything. We've come and followed you. This man wouldn't do it, but we have. What are we going to have? And Jesus begins to tell them what they can expect. So the owner goes out at the first hour and he hires some workers to come to his vineyard. And they're going to work the 12-hour day. They're going to work through the heat of the sun. And at different hours during the day, he continues to go out. He tells the ones that he hires first, now, I'll have you work for a day, and at the end of the day, you'll get a day's wage. That's fair enough. And as he goes throughout the day, and he gets some at different hours, he tells them, at the end of the day, whatever's fair, I'll pay you. Finally, the very last hour, he goes and he finds some others that have not yet been employed. He brings them into the vineyard and says, I'll give you what's fair at the end of the day. They work 1 hour. And then, as the day comes to a close, he brings those that had been hired at the 11th hour before him, and he gives them a day's wage. Now, those that had been hired the first hour, those that worked all the way through the day, they saw what they got, and they thought, wow, we're really going to get something. Look how hard we worked all day long. When they come to be paid, they get a day's wage also. What do you think the response is? Well, they're enraged. They say, look, these people who were hired the last hour at the coolest part of the day, who have only worked for 1 hour, they're going to get paid the same thing that we are. That's not right. Well, that's what you agreed to, wasn't it? Now, if I choose to be generous with this other man, is that not lawful? Can I not do what is lawful with what is my own? I've not done anything wrong to you. I've given you exactly what I told that I would give you. And I'm going to give this one just the same thing that I'm giving to you. And then he makes a statement right there in Matthew chapter 20, one that may leave us puzzling, especially in considering the society in which we have been reared. Jesus tells them in verse number 16, so the last shall be first and the first last. For many are called, but few chosen. You notice he brought the last ones to be hired in and gave them their reward first. Not only does he give them the same thing that he has given to those that have worked all day long, he pays them first. Now, Jesus is telling this to whom? To his disciples, those that have been with him the longest, those that were the first ones to sign up, to enlist. And they're wanting to know, okay, what are we going to get? What's our reward going to be? And Jesus is telling them, this is how it's going to be. You think that you're going to be so much greater in the kingdom because you think you've sacrificed so much more? The first are going to be last. You need to be willing to stand in the back of the line if you want to be rewarded as a disciple of mine. If you want to be great in the kingdom, you need to be one that's willing to take a back seat. You need to be the one that is willing to give up the lion's portion of the lion's share to someone else. That's the way it is in the kingdom of heaven. Oh, that's a very different concept from what we're used to, where the one that works harder is the one who gets ahead. Jesus said the first will be last. And you need to be okay with that if you're going to be a disciple of mine. But there in chapter 19, if you turn back, you really see this in its setting. Verse 27, Peter, after the encounter with the rich young ruler, he says, behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? Jesus said, verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, ye shall sit upon 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. That's what they're looking for. And every one that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. But many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Peter, you're going to have to be patient about this. Yes, there are going to be some tremendous rewards surpassing your imagination, but you've got to be patient. You may remember again in chapter 20, when they're on their way toward Jerusalem, James and John have their mother come and approach Jesus about giving them special positions in the kingdom. What does Jesus tell them? You remember what he asked? In verse number 22, you do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink of the cup that I shall drink of? To be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? In other words, you need to count the cost. You need to know what it's going to cost in order to be great in the kingdom. You've got to put yourself at the very, very back. The kingdom is not about being served, you see. It's about serving. And Eddie, I find it interesting, right after that encounter with James and John, they come to the city of Jericho, and there's a blind man who is crying out to the Son of David to be healed. Everybody's trying to tell him to be quiet. Jesus tells him to step forward. And the Bible tells us that he heals that man of his blindness. It's like Jesus is trying to show them here as they're making their way to Jerusalem for him to die. This is what the kingdom's about.
Right.
It's about serving. It's not about what's in it for me. It's about what can I do for others. And that's what being a disciple of Jesus is all about. That's one of the rewards in and of itself.
Amen.
And we've got to understand that before we begin to follow.
You know, what would the labor unions do with a policy like that today? You're talking about being tore all to pieces. And I've got a little sermon I've used on that Matthew 20 before, Robbie. I call it grumbling about grace. You know, God can extend His grace to whom He wants to, and we grumble about it. Well, here I've been a faithful child of God for 45 years, and I've had my ups and downs, and this old boy don't hardly get out of the baptistry. He's dead and gets the blessings I'm going to get. Well, that's just ridiculous. You know, and just grumble and gripe and moan. But the Lord is so fair and so just, and we have so badly missed what real discipleship is. It's like you said, it's not just I'm going to get heaven, I'm going to get blessed, but it's about how can I bless the lives of someone else, and how much better lives we'd all be living if we would be looking every day of our lives toward individuals that need help, encouragement, that we could be a servant to. But unfortunately, we don't always do that.
And you look at two individuals right on death's doorstep.
Mm-hmm.
One just becomes a Christian at the end of his life, and the other one has been for decades. And someone might look at that and say, look how hard this person worked all his life to try to follow Jesus. And here this man, you know, gave his life at the very last breath almost, and both of them are going to get rewarded the same. Well, I'd say if you ask those men to look back across their lives, one of them dedicated to following Jesus and the other dedicated to self and self alone, I'd say that individual who followed Jesus would tell you, I'll take my life over his in a heartbeat, because I was blessed. I was blessed by following Jesus, by making the sacrifices I did. It was a better way to live my life by far.
Yeah, you know, we were studying the kings, Robbie, and you take a king like Manasseh that was so ungodly and everything, and yet at the end of his life straightened up. Right. You look at a man like Asa that was such a godly man almost all of his life, and at the end messed up. You know, and you look at that in human thinking, you might say, this don't seem fair. That a man that's lived all these years so faithfully to God could end up being lost at the last minute. But you know, Ezekiel gave that warning.
That's right. In
Ezekiel 18. And so we've just got to understand serving the Lord is costly, and what a tragic mistake it is to serve God almost all of our lives and toward the end of it quit. I mean, that doesn't make a lick of sense, but it happens, and we have to guard ourselves, because Paul said, let the man that thinks he stand take heed lest he fall. That's so right. It can happen to us. We just have to be careful and guard our souls.
Absolutely.
So let's continue to look at some things here that's so very important to us as well. You know, he told Peter to be more mindful of the things of God than the things of men. Now, that's one thing to say that. It's another thing to practice that. And Peter had some difficulty here. In Matthew 16, verses 21 to 23, Here we see just after the confession that Peter had made that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, he then rebukes Jesus when Jesus spoke of his death. For example, in the 16th chapter of Matthew, verse 21, from that time forth began Jesus to show unto the disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and to be killed, and to be raised again the third day. And then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, this thing, or this shall not be unto thee. And he turned and he said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan, for thou art an offense to me. For thou savorest not, now listen, thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. So Jesus is trying to get the Apostle Peter to see where the emphasis ought to be is not upon the things of men, but the things of God. And we err so many times in our thinking when we depart from that. The Apostle Paul used, I thought, a beautiful illustration in Philippians 1:21 through 24, when he talked about and discussed how he was in a strait betwixt two, and then he said, I have a desire to depart and to be with God. And he says, this is the situation that's far better. But nevertheless, listen, it's more needful for you. It's more needful for you that I stay here. Now, think about that. How many of us would choose staying here because we can help someone go to heaven than to actually going to heaven ourselves at that moment? You see, friends, that is the kind of mindset that we need to develop. In every decision that we make, we must consider how it will affect the kingdom. And this involves Eddie Kraft denying himself. And so I've got to get it right. And if I'm not willing to deny myself and it's all about me, then what kind of life am I going to live? If we want to follow Jesus, and we say we do, then friends, we got to carry our cross the whole way, every day, 24/7. Luke 9:23, take up your cross daily and follow me. And that's what it takes. And so we can't just simply lay it aside, pick it back up, lay it aside when it's not convenient. We got to carry that cross every day. And so, Robbie, it's like the fellow said about wanting the knowledge that another preacher had. He said, I'd give my life to know what you know. And he said, that's what it cost me. Now, what it costs us for discipleship is our life. It's what it costs Jesus, and it's what it costs us. And this taking up the cross is not something you just pick up and lay down whenever you want to. We must bear that cross on a daily basis.
Yeah, because there are times when it becomes heavy.
Yes.
It gets hard. There are times when it is even more inconvenient than others. That cross is going to brand us. It's going to tell people who we are, what we are. And you know, there are some times when we find ourselves in the company of others who are carrying their crosses. And that makes it a little bit easier. But then there come times when we'll be in the company of those like Jesus was when he carried his, casting insults. And as we read the prophecy in the Old Testament that's quoted in Romans chapter 15, the insults that were cast upon you fell on me. And we start to get some of those things that were said to Jesus said to us. And he said, you know, a servant is not greater than his master, John 15. And if they've persecuted me, you can bet they're going to persecute you too. If you were the world would love its own, but you're not of this world. And so therefore the world is going to hate us. Now, if the world loves us, if the world thinks that we're the greatest thing that ever was, that ought to lead us to question some things about our fellowship of Jesus. Are we following him as closely as we ought to? Because we can do like Peter, we can follow him from a distance and think that we're not going to be associated with him. People won't know that we're with him. We can't do that. We've got to follow Jesus daily with that cross, and we've got to follow him every step of the way. And that is going to cost us sometimes a lot more than what we'd like to pay.
You know, Tom Warren told the story one time of going to a funeral, and he said to people that got up, said, I don't ever know of a cross word anybody ever said about this man. And he said, it caused me to fear for his soul. And you know, you think about that, Robbie, if everybody's singing my praises, it may be that I'm not doing something right. And, we're not trying to be offensive. We don't have to be. People get offended easily enough without us trying to do it.
That's right.
But the point is, sometimes we try to nice people into heaven, but we nice them into hell. And we have to stand for those principles, and it's not easy to do that sometimes.
That's exactly right. And as Eddie said already, what ultimately it's going to cost you in order to follow Jesus is your life. What do we mean by that? Well, let's look again at the words of Jesus. Matthew 16. After Peter makes the good confession, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," Jesus blesses him. "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Flesh and blood has not revealed it to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I'll give you the keys of the kingdom. Whatever things you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever things you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And Jesus pronounces this blessing on him. But then, as Eddie has said, he begins to talk about his death that's going to be accomplished in Jerusalem. Peter withstands him. And he says, "This is not going to happen to you." And Jesus says, "You're savoring the things that are of men and not the things that are of God." And then he says this in verse number 24. "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself." Peter, that's what you need to do. Deny self. Deny what you want. That doesn't enter into the equation at all. Deny yourself. Let him take up his cross and follow me. Luke's account says, "Let him daily take his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life," if you want to save your life, then you're going to lose it. "Whoever would save his life for my sake shall find it." You're going to have to give up your life. In other words, give up your will. The way you would live your life, if it were all up to you, give that up. Now, it may mean that you're going to have to lay your head down on the block and physically surrender your life. Most likely, that's not going to be the case in the time in which we live. Maybe it could be in the future. But we do have to lose our lives. We've got to give up ourselves, our own personal identity, and do what Jesus wants instead with our life. "For what is a man profit if he shall gain the whole world and shall lose his own soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" The real way to make this life meaningful, it's not to acquire some great position, some presidency of some great institution, to be the CEO or something like that. It's not to acquire fame or riches or anything like that, prestige. The only way to really make this life meaningful is to give it to the Lord. Let Him, and essentially live it for you, by letting Him make the choices. Life is short anyway. James 4:14, what is your life? It's a vapor that appears for a little while and then it vanishes away. It's not going to be that long. In Romans 8, Paul talks about the sufferings of this life, which are they're just momentary. They're not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed, Romans 8, verse 17. Jesus told His disciples, here in verse number 27, the day was coming. The Son of Man was going to come in His glory. It's going to happen. It's going to happen soon enough. And they were going to see His kingdom within their lifetimes. There are some of you standing here that will see the kingdom. He says, there are some of you that are standing here that shall not taste of death till they shall see the Son of Man coming in His kingdom. The reward is coming. They were going to see that glorious institution born on the day of Pentecost in the church of our Lord. But the point of the matter is, we've got to give up our lives in order to find it. Let us not seek our rewards here on this earth, because then we cannot expect the greatest rewards that God has in store for us later. The question is, are you willing to deny yourself? You cannot follow Jesus until you're ready to make that level of commitment to Him. And so, Eddie, what this means is every decision that I make in my life, I'm going to consider, how is this going to affect the kingdom of God?
Right.
If I choose to take this new job, and it's going to take me to this city over here, well, the first thing I want to do is look and see, is there a faithful church there? Is there a place where my family can assemble and worship with the saints? And if there's not, I'm seriously going to reconsider that.
That's right. Because
that's going to mean we're going to be busy planning a congregation there if we do go. I'm going to think about if I go and I buy this house that I would love to buy, it's my dream home, it's going to put us into some serious debt. I may have to get a second job in order to help to pay for that. And it's going to mean that I don't have the kind of contact with my family I'd like to have, but we're just going to make that sacrifice. how's it going to affect my service to God? Well, I won't have time to worship on Sundays because I'm going to have to work overtime all the time, every chance I get. How's it going to affect the way that I serve God, the way I follow Jesus? I'm giving up my life, the way I would live it if it were all up to me, in order to follow Him and do what He wants me to do.
Those are so crucial decisions, Robbie, that have to be made. I remember a man came here one time with 2 small children and his wife, looking the church over. Sit down, talked with me, took a tour of the building, asked Bible questions. These are things that meant something to him before he moved his family to Elizabethton, Tennessee. Is there a faithful church of Christ there where I can serve and worship with my family and do the Lord's will? That is so important.
Certainly is.
And no job is worth your soul, folk. So maybe you have to take a job making less money, but I'm going to tell you what, you'll be glad you did in eternity. What is a man advantaged if he gained the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? So we've got to be faithful, loyal to God, and that's what we hope and pray that you'll be willing to do. And if we can assist you on Biblical Viewpoints in making that commitment, don't hesitate to call upon us, because we would be glad to assist you in any way that we possibly can.
So many times we sing the song, all to Jesus I surrender, all to Him I freely give. And sometimes I think it is the case that we forget that we have sang to Him, made a commitment to Him, that we have truly surrendered ourselves to Him, but not living according to the way He wants us to live. Have you given yourself to Him? Have you truly committed yourself to Him? Let us do a better job in that area, and we'll be blessed if we do.
Jesus tells us that there should be nothing too great for us to give to Him. As a matter of fact, in the Sermon on the Mount, He says, if your hand or your eye offends you, pluck it out and cast it from you. If those things could offend us in some way to keep us from following Jesus, we need to remove them. And we may think, we don't have that much to give. We need to remember the widow's 2 mites.
Oh.
How that she gave. She didn't have so much as the others did, but it's the heart that the Lord is looking for, and that's what He's still looking for today.
Yeah, He said, look, you guys gave out the abundance of the things you have. She gave her entire living. Now, that's one thing for me to put my check in the contribution plate next Lord's Day, but I still got money left over for this, that, and the other. What if I'd have put it all in and said, look, there's a need here, and I'm going to give this, and I'm going to trust the Lord that He'll provide.
And the point is, it's all His. It's all dedicated to Him. How I use it through the week is also for the Lord in some way, and then I'm following Jesus the way I should.
Isn't that great? We hope you'll follow Jesus today.
We have heard the joyful sound.
Thank you for joining us today on Biblical Viewpoints. If you have a question concerning the things taught on this program, desire to enroll in our free home Bible study course, or have some other way we may assist you in your quest to know the truth, you may contact us at Biblical Viewpoints, 137 East C Street, Elizabethton, Tennessee, 37643. In the meantime, we encourage you to find a Church of Christ meeting in your community and worship with them. You will always find a hearty welcome and a group of Christians eager to serve you.